The alarm screamed across Ramstein Air Base as Senior Airman Mila Kuznetsova sealed the canopy of the $80 million F-35 Lightning II and felt the massive Pratt& Whitney engine roar to life beneath her. Just minutes earlier, she had been checking tire pressure on the tarmac. Before we continue, tell us where you were tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, make sure to subscribe, as I've got something extra special saved for tomorrow. With enemy missiles inbound and no qualified pilots available, the 23-year-old Ukrainian ground crew member was about to attempt something that would either save hundreds of lives or destroy the most advanced fighter jet in the world. What happened next would change everything anyone thought they knew about who belonged in a cockpit. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete expanse of Ramstein Air Base as Senior Airman Mila Kuznetsova knelt beside the landing gear of an F-35 Lightning II, her calloused hands expertly checking hydraulic pressure readings. The base hummed with its familiar rhythm, ground crews conducting pre-flight inspections, fuel trucks rumbling between aircraft, and the distant whine of engines warming up for training missions. Mila had been performing these duties for months, ever since she had been transferred from her home base in Poland following the escalation of tensions in Eastern Europe. Her small frame, barely 5 feet 4 inches and weighing perhaps 125 pounds, made her nearly invisible among the towering fighters and massive ground equipment. But her attention to detail was legendary among the maintenance crews. "Kuznetsova," barked Technical Sergeant Brooks, the crew chief who had never quite mastered the pronunciation of her surname. "How's that landing gear looking?" "Pressure nominal, hydraulics clean, no stress fractures detected," Mila replied in accented but precise English, her voice carrying the slight musical quality of her native Ukrainian. She had learned English in school back in Kiev, but military terminology had required months of additional study. "Aircraft 075234 is ready for flight operations." Brooks nodded curtly and moved on to the next aircraft. Their interactions rarely extended beyond technical discussions. She was competent, reliable, and quiet, exactly what was expected from ground crew personnel. What wasn't expected, and what nobody knew, was that she had grown up as the daughter of a retired Ukrainian Air Force colonel. As she completed her inspection checklist, Mila's eyes lingered on the F-35's cockpit, the advanced glass displays, the sleek control interfaces, the pilot seat positioned like a throne commanding the most sophisticated weapon system ever created. It all felt hauntingly familiar. Her father had spent countless evenings during her childhood explaining aviation principles, aircraft systems, and flight dynamics. What started as bedtime stories about his MiG-29 days had evolved into detailed technical discussions about thrust-to-weight ratios, avionics integration, and combat tactics. Daydreaming again, Kuznetsova. The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Martinez, one of the few people on base who made an effort to be friendly. Unlike many of her colleagues, Martinez didn't see Mila's quiet demeanor as antisocial. She recognized it as the careful observation of someone still adapting to a foreign military culture. "Just ensuring everything is perfect," Mila replied, closing her inspection tablet. "The pilot's life depends on our work." Martinez nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. Speaking of pilots, you hear about the training exercise today? They're running simulated intercept scenarios with a new lieutenant from the 480th Fighter Squadron. Fresh out of pilot training, apparently." Mila had heard. She had watched Lieutenant Davidson during his pre-flight briefings, noting his nervous energy and the way he triple-checked every switch and display. Newly minted pilots always carried that mixture of excitement and terror. She remembered the stories her father told about his early days, how the responsibility of commanding such powerful aircraft could overwhelm even the most prepared aviators. "The F-35 is forgiving to those who respect it," Mila said, repeating something her father had told her about modern fly-by-wire systems, "but it demands complete understanding." Martinez gave her a curious look. "You know a lot about aircraft for ground crew." Mila shrugged, deflecting as she always did when someone noticed her knowledge extending beyond routine maintenance. "You learn things when you pay attention." What Martinez didn't know, what nobody at Ramstein knew, was that Mila had been paying attention her entire life. During her teenage years in Ukraine, she had spent summers at military airfields, absorbing everything from aircraft handling characteristics to emergency procedures. Her father, recognizing her genuine passion and natural aptitude, had arranged for her to log simulator time on various aircraft types. By age 18, she had accumulated over 200 hours of simulated flight time, including 40 hours in systems that closely replicated F-35 operations. But when economic circumstances forced her to seek opportunities abroad, the U.S. Air Force offered her a position in aircraft maintenance, not pilot training. Her dream of flying had been shelved in favor of the practical necessity of supporting her family back home. The monthly stipend she sent to her parents in war-torn Ukraine meant more than personal ambitions. As the morning progressed, Mila moved between aircraft with practiced efficiency. She inspected hydraulic systems, tested communication equipment, and verified weapon system interfaces. Each task was performed with meticulous attention to detail that exceeded requirements. Her supervisors had noted this quality in her performance reviews, though they attributed it to simple conscientiousness rather than deep technical understanding. During her lunch break, Mila sat alone at a corner table in the dining facility, reading a technical manual about advanced avionics integration. Most ground crews spent their downtime playing cards or watching movies on their phones. Mila studied flight manuals, weather pattern analysis, and tactical aviation publications. She told herself it was professional development, but the truth was more complicated. She couldn't let go of the dream that had defined her childhood. The afternoon brought routine maintenance on 3 more F-35s, each inspection revealing the incredible complexity of these modern fighters. As she worked, Mila found herself mentally rehearsing flight procedures, emergency protocols, and system management techniques. It was a habit she had developed to stay sharp, though she had never expected to use this knowledge in any practical sense. As the day shift ended and evening crews took over, Mila gathered her tools and prepared to head back to her dormitory. Tomorrow would bring another day of inspections, another day of watching pilots climb into cockpits while she remained firmly planted on the ground. It was a good job, an honorable job, and she was grateful for the opportunity. She just had no idea that soon everything would change, and all those years of hidden preparation would suddenly become the difference between life and death for hundreds of people. The next morning's pilot briefing took place in Building 242, a sterile conference room where flight schedules and training objectives were distributed with military precision. Mila wasn't supposed to be there. Ground crew received their assignments through different channels, but a discrepancy in the maintenance logs for aircraft 075234 required clarification before flight operations could begin. She stood near the back wall, trying to remain invisible while Major Harrison, the squadron operations officer, addressed the assembled pilots. The room buzzed with the confident energy of aviators discussing weather conditions, target parameters, and communication protocols. These men and women carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of those who had earned the right to command multi-million-dollar weapon systems. Today's exercise simulates a time-critical intercept scenario, Major Harrison announced, clicking through PowerPoint slides that displayed threat vectors and engagement zones. Our intelligence indicates potential hostile aircraft approaching German airspace. The 480th Squadron will respond with a 4-ship formation, establishing air superiority while protecting key infrastructure targets. Lieutenant Davidson, the young pilot Mila had observed the previous day, raised his hand. "Sir, what's our backup protocol of primary aircraft experience mechanical failures?" "Good question, Davidson. We have 2 spare aircraft prepped and ready. Pilots Martinez and Chenin are on standby status." Harrison nodded toward 2 seasoned aviators who acknowledged their roles with professional nods. Mila listened to the discussion while reviewing her maintenance documentation, noting the casual confidence with which these pilots discussed scenarios that would terrify most people. Flying supersonic aircraft into potential combat situations was simply another day at the office for them. But as she listened more carefully, she began to notice something troubling. The briefing assumed perfect conditions, clear weather, functioning equipment, and predictable enemy behavior. There was little discussion of contingency planning beyond basic mechanical backup procedures. Mila's father had always emphasized that real combat aviation required preparation for scenarios that couldn't be anticipated, situations where standard procedures might prove inadequate. After the briefing dispersed, Mila approached Major Harrison with her maintenance documentation. Sir, I need clarification on the hydraulic service requirements for aircraft 075234. Harrison glanced at her briefly, his attention already shifting to more pressing concerns. Handle it through your crew, Chief Airman. Yes, sir, but the readings indicate Kaznitsova, right? Harrison interrupted, finally focusing on her properly. You're the Ukrainian tech who transferred from Poland. Good work ethic, according to your supervisors. But maintenance issues go through proper channels. I'm sure Technical Sergeant Brooks can address whatever concerns you have. Mila recognized the polite dismissal. In Harrison's mind, she was capable ground crew, competent within her narrow specialty, but lacking the broader knowledge necessary for operational discussions. The possibility that she might understand flight dynamics, threat assessment, or tactical aviation simply didn't exist in his framework of military hierarchy. This pattern repeated itself throughout her time at Ramstein. During safety briefings, her questions were redirected to maintenance-specific topics. When discussing aircraft capabilities, conversations ended when she approached. Her knowledge was valued only within the confined boundaries of her assigned duties. The most frustrating example had occurred weeks earlier during a maintenance meeting where squadron pilots discussed persistent avionics problems affecting mission readiness. Mila had identified a pattern in the malfunctions. They occurred primarily during high-G maneuvers in specific weather conditions, suggesting an interaction between environmental factors and software protocols. Her solution involved adjusting calibration parameters that could be implemented during routine maintenance. Interesting theory, Kuznetsova, Lieutenant Colonel Peterson had said after she had hesitantly shared her analysis. But avionics troubleshooting is handled by specialized technicians. Ground crew focuses on mechanical systems. Her suggestion was noted and filed away, though Mila later learned that contracted avionics specialists had reached the same conclusion months later, implementing exactly the solution she had proposed. The difference was that their recommendation came with the expensive consulting fees and official certification, while hers had come from a Ukrainian ground crew member who wasn't supposed to understand complex system interactions. The underlying message was clear. Knowledge and capability were determined by rank and assignment, not by actual understanding or competence. Mila could know everything about flying F-35s, but as long as she wore the stripes of an enlisted maintenance worker, her expertise would remain invisible to those who made operational decisions. This institutional blindness extended to her fellow enlisted personnel as well. During conversations in the dormitory or dining facility, other airmen expressed genuine puzzlement at her dedication to studying flight manuals and tactical publications. "Why do you waste your time reading that stuff?" asked Senior Airman Phillips, her roommate, during one evening conversation. "You're never going to be a pilot. Women from Eastern Europe don't become fighter pilots in the U.S. Air Force. Even American women barely make it through the program." Phillips wasn't being malicious. She was stating what seemed like obvious reality. The path from foreign-born enlisted maintenance worker to F-35 pilot simply didn't exist in any official capacity. The requirements were too numerous, the barriers too high, and the cultural assumptions too entrenched. But Phillips, like everyone else at Ramstein, didn't understand Mila's background. They saw a quiet maintenance worker who followed orders and avoided attention. They didn't see someone who had been immersed in aviation culture since childhood, who had accumulated extensive flight training on advanced simulators, who understood aircraft systems at a level that rivaled many certified pilots. The systematic underestimation had become Mila's invisible advantage. While others dismissed her capabilities based on her position and background, she continued learning, preparing, and developing skills that far exceeded anyone's expectations. She had learned to hide her knowledge behind a facade of simple competence, knowing that revealing too much would only generate suspicion or resentment. As she completed her evening maintenance rounds, checking each aircraft with the same meticulous attention she brought to every task, Mila reflected on the strange contradiction of her situation. She was surrounded by the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, working alongside pilots who trusted their lives to machines she understood better than most of them realized. Yet the institutional barriers that defined military hierarchy made her expertise irrelevant in any practical sense. Tomorrow would bring another day of inspections, another day of watching others climb into cockpits while she remained firmly planted on the ground. The system had determined her role, and that system seemed unshakable. She had no way of knowing that soon that system would face a crisis that would shatter every assumption about who belonged in a fighter cockpit. The emergency klaxons began wailing across Ramstein Air Base, shattering the quiet efficiency of normal operations. Mila was performing a scheduled inspection on aircraft 075234 when the piercing alarm sounded. Around her, ground crews immediately stopped their work and looked toward the command tower, where rotating red lights indicated a base-wide alert condition. All personnel, came the announcement over the base-wide communication system. This is not a drill. Report to emergency stations immediately. All aircraft operations are suspended pending further orders. Mila secured her inspection equipment and jogged toward Building 242, where emergency procedures dictated that all personnel would receive briefings on the developing situation. The parking lot filled rapidly with airmen from across the base, their faces showing the mixture of concern and professional readiness that characterized military personnel facing an unexpected crisis. Inside the briefing room, Major Harrison stood before a large display screen showing a map of Central European airspace. Red symbols indicated aircraft positions, while amber zones marked areas of particular concern. The tension in the room was palpable as officers consulted tablets and whispered urgently among themselves. "Listen up," Harrison announced, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. NATO radar stations detected multiple unidentified aircraft approaching German airspace from the northeast. These aircraft are not responding to standard identification protocols and appear to be flying in formation at high altitude. The display screen updated to show the approximate positions of the unknown aircraft, their flight path trending directly toward major German population centers. Mila studied the tactical situation, noting that the intruders' approach vector would bring them over several critical infrastructure targets, including power generation facilities and transportation hubs. Intelligence assessment indicates these may be reconnaissance aircraft probing NATO response capabilities, Harrison continued. However, we cannot rule out the possibility of hostile intent. The German government has requested immediate assistance from Allied air forces to establish positive identification and, if necessary, provide escort services out of German airspace. Lieutenant Davidson raised his hand. "Sir, what's our response timeline?" "We need 4 F-35s airborne soon to establish intercept positions. The 480th Squadron will provide primary response with backup aircraft on immediate standby status." As Harrison began reading pilot assignments, Mila felt a growing sense of unease. She had studied the intelligence briefings that crossed her desk during routine maintenance coordination, and she knew that current geopolitical tensions made any unidentified aircraft intrusion extremely serious. This wasn't a training exercise or routine patrol. This was a potential combat situation that could escalate rapidly depending on the intentions of the unknown aircraft. "Martinez, your flight leader," Harrison announced. "Chen, Davidson, and Thompson, you're his wingmen. Aircraft are being prepped for immediate departure." The selected pilots acknowledged their assignments and began filing out of the briefing room, their expressions showing the focused intensity of aviators preparing for potentially dangerous missions. But as they reached the exit, Harrison's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. "Sir, this is Technical Sergeant Brooks in maintenance control. We have a problem with aircraft readiness." Harrison keyed his radio with visible frustration. "What kind of problem, Brooks?" "Sir, we've got 2 F-35s down for emergency maintenance, hydraulic system failures that require immediate attention. Aircraft 075221 and 075267 are not mission capable." The briefing room fell silent as the implications became clear. The squadron needed 4 aircraft for the intercept mission, but only had 2 immediately available. "How long to get the backup aircraft mission ready?" Harrison asked. "Sir, we're looking at a minimum of 2 hours for proper repairs and system checks. These are issues we can't shortcut safely." Harrison's jaw tightened as he processed this information. 2 hours would be far too long. The unidentified aircraft would have completed their reconnaissance mission, or worse, carried out any hostile intentions they might have harbored. The window for effective intercept was measured in minutes, not hours. "Sir," came another voice over the radio, this time from the air traffic control tower, "the unknown aircraft have altered course. They're now heading directly toward Frankfurt airspace. German air defenses requesting immediate intercept support. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had started as a routine identification mission was becoming a time-critical emergency with potential international implications. Mila watched the display screen as the red symbols representing unknown aircraft moved closer to major population centers. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, the squadron commander, entered the briefing room at a run, his flight suit indicating he had been preparing for a different mission when the emergency developed. "Harrison, what's our status?" "Sir, we need 4 birds in the air immediately, but we only have 2 mission-capable aircraft. Maintenance is working on backup options, but we're looking at significant delays." Peterson studied the tactical display, his expression growing increasingly grim as he absorbed the implications. "That's not acceptable. Those unknown aircraft could be anything from reconnaissance platforms to delivery systems for weapons of mass destruction. We cannot allow them to reach their apparent targets without positive identification and appropriate response." "Sir, we're working with what we have. Martinez and Chenin can launch immediately with the 2 available aircraft, but without full formation support, that's not sufficient for this threat level," Harrison replied. "We need full intercept capability, and we need it now," Peterson interrupted. As the senior officers debated their limited options, Mila found herself studying the maintenance reports that had created this crisis. The hydraulic failures weren't random mechanical problems. They were predictable issues that could have been prevented with proper preventive maintenance protocols. More importantly, she knew that at least one of the grounded aircraft could be returned to service much more quickly than Technical Sergeant Brooks had estimated. The communication system problems she had identified weeks earlier were contributing to the maintenance delays. Ground crews were having difficulty coordinating repair efforts because their communication protocols weren't optimized for emergency situations. With the right approach, she could have aircraft 075267 mission ready within minutes instead of hours. But as she listened to the increasingly desperate discussion among senior officers, Mila realized that her technical knowledge was only part of the solution. Even if she could get additional aircraft operational, there was still the fundamental problem of available pilots. The squadron had only a limited number of certified F-35 aviators, and several were currently deployed on other missions or unavailable due to medical or administrative reasons. The crisis was revealing gaps in the system that went far beyond simple mechanical failures. It was exposing the rigid assumptions about who could fly combat missions and under what circumstances those assumptions might prove dangerously inadequate. As the briefing room buzzed with urgent conversations about mechanical workarounds and pilot availability, Mila began to realize that her months of hidden preparation might suddenly become relevant in ways she had never anticipated. While her fellow airmen spent their off-duty hours at the base recreation center or exploring nearby German towns, Mila had developed a different routine. Every evening after her maintenance shift ended, she would return to her dormitory room and transform it into a makeshift aviation study center. Her small desk was covered with flight manuals, weather analysis charts, and technical publications that she had quietly acquired through official and unofficial channels. The most prized possession in her collection was a tablet loaded with F-35 flight simulation software, not the basic training programs available to ground crew, but advanced tactical simulators that she had obtained through contacts in her father's network of retired Ukrainian pilots. These weren't officially sanctioned training tools, but they provided incredibly detailed recreations of F-35 cockpit operations, emergency procedures, and combat scenarios. Several nights per week, Mila would slip into Building 1847 after the day shift ended, using her maintenance access card to enter the aircraft systems training facility. The building housed various cockpit simulators used for pilot refresher training, but it also contained detailed mock-ups of F-35 systems that were supposed to be used only by certified technicians and pilots. Her official duties required familiarity with these systems from a maintenance perspective, so her presence in the facility wouldn't raise suspicions. But Mila wasn't just studying maintenance procedures. She was running complete flight profiles, practicing everything from engine startup sequences to emergency ejection protocols. Her father had trained her to think like a pilot, not just a technician, to understand how each system contributed to overall aircraft performance and mission success. The complexity of modern fighter aircraft meant that even certified pilots specialized in specific areas. Some excelled at air-to-air combat, others focused on precision bombing, and still others mastered reconnaissance operations. But Mila's background had given her something unusual: comprehensive understanding across all mission types. Her father's stories had covered everything from dogfighting tactics to ground attack procedures, while her technical training provided deep knowledge of how aircraft systems supported each mission profile. During one late evening session, she had discovered something that troubled her deeply. While reviewing recent maintenance logs and cross-referencing them with pilot performance reports, she noticed a pattern that others had missed. Several F-35s were experiencing intermittent communication system failures during high-stress maneuvers, failures that occurred too randomly for pilots to predict or compensate for during critical moments. The problem wasn't mechanical. It was related to software protocols that managed communication switching during rapid altitude changes. The failures lasted only seconds, but in combat situations, those seconds could mean the difference between successful missions and catastrophic losses. More concerning, the failures were becoming more frequent, suggesting that the underlying software issue was degrading over time. Mila had spent weeks analyzing the data, comparing maintenance records with flight logs and pilot debriefings. She had developed a comprehensive understanding of when and why the failures occurred, and, more importantly, had figured out manual workarounds that pilots could use to maintain communications even when automated systems failed. But when she attempted to share this analysis through proper channels, her findings were dismissed as beyond her scope of responsibility. Technical Sergeant Brooks had acknowledged her thoroughness, but explained that communication systems were handled by specialized contractors who possessed the appropriate security clearances and technical certifications. "You're excellent at your job, Kuznetsova," Brooks had told her, "but you need to stay in your lane. System-level analysis is handled by people with advanced degrees and specialized training." What Brooks didn't realize was that Mila's analysis had been more comprehensive than anything the contracted specialist had produced. Her unique combination of technical knowledge and operational understanding had allowed her to identify patterns that escaped more narrowly focused experts. Frustrated but undeterred, Mila had decided to prepare her own informal briefing materials, detailed explanations of the communication system vulnerabilities, along with step-by-step procedures that pilots could use to maintain operational effectiveness even during system failures. She couldn't officially distribute this information, but she could ensure it was ready if circumstances ever created an opportunity to share it. This became part of a larger pattern in Mila's preparation. She identified potential problems that others missed, developed solutions that exceeded her official responsibilities, and quietly prepared materials that might someday prove valuable. Her dormitory room contained detailed analyses of weather patterns that affected F-35 performance, tactical assessments of potential threat scenarios in European airspace, and comprehensive checklists for emergency procedures that weren't covered in standard pilot training. Most significantly, she had developed what amounted to a complete F-35 pilot certification program for herself. Using simulators, technical manuals, and extensive consultation with her father's network of experienced aviators, she had systematically worked through every aspect of F-35 operations. She understood the aircraft's capabilities and limitations better than many certified pilots, and she had accumulated the equivalent of over 300 hours of realistic flight training. Nobody knew about this preparation because nobody had asked her. Supervisors saw her as a dedicated ground crew member who occasionally asked insightful technical questions. Her fellow airmen saw her as someone who studied too much and socialized too little. Her dormitory roommates saw her as someone who read boring manuals instead of watching movies or playing video games. The invisibility that frustrated her professionally had become her greatest asset in developing capabilities that far exceeded anyone's expectations. While others focused on their assigned duties within narrow specializations, Mila had been preparing for opportunities that didn't officially exist. On quiet nights when she practiced emergency procedures on her tablet simulator, Mila sometimes wondered if all this preparation was simply an elaborate form of escapism, a way to maintain a connection to childhood dreams that would never become reality. The gap between ground crew maintenance worker and F-35 pilot seemed insurmountable, regardless of her actual capabilities. But her father had taught her that preparation created opportunities, and opportunities rarely announce themselves in advance. Always be ready, he had told her during their last conversation before she left for Germany. In aviation, the difference between life and death often comes down to preparation that nobody thought was necessary. Sir, I might be able to help with the maintenance issue. Mila's voice cut through the urgent discussions between senior officers, causing conversations to pause as heads turned toward her position near the back of the briefing room. She immediately felt the weight of attention from people who rarely noticed her presence, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed irritation at the interruption. Major Harrison looked up from his tactical display, his face showing the strain of managing a rapidly deteriorating situation. Kuznetsova, this is not the time for routine maintenance questions. We're dealing with a national security emergency. Sir, I understand the situation, Mila replied, her voice steady despite the intimidating focus of senior leadership. But I've been working on aircraft 075267, and the hydraulic problem isn't as severe as the initial assessment indicates. With the right approach, I could have that aircraft mission ready soon. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson turned toward her, his expression shifting from dismissive to cautiously interested. Explain. Mila had prepared for this moment during countless hours of study, though she had never imagined it would occur during an actual emergency. Sir, the hydraulic failure is isolated to the secondary system. The primary system is fully functional, and there's a manual override procedure that allows full flight operations with reduced redundancy. It's not ideal for extended missions, but for a short intercept flight, the aircraft would be completely safe and mission capable. Technical Sergeant Brooks, who had joined the briefing via radio, immediately contradicted her assessment. Negative, sir. Air Force regulations require full system redundancy for combat operations. Flying with compromised hydraulics violates multiple safety protocols. Brooks is correct, Peterson said, his brief interest already fading. We don't shortcut safety procedures regardless of the operational pressure. But Mila had anticipated this objection. Sir, Regulation TU-1F-35A1, Section 4.7.3, specifically allows single-system hydraulic operations for emergency intercept missions, provided the primary system shows no degradation and the pilot is briefed on modified procedures. I've reviewed the maintenance logs, and aircraft 075267 meets those criteria. The briefing room fell silent as Peterson consulted with Harrison and the operations officer. Mila's citation of specific technical orders was accurate. She had memorized emergency procedures that even some senior maintenance personnel didn't fully understand. But her knowledge was creating an uncomfortable situation for the chain of command, who weren't accustomed to receiving technical guidance from junior enlisted personnel. Even if that's correct, Harrison said slowly, we still have the pilot availability problem. Martinez and Chen can handle 2 aircraft, but we need 4 for proper intercept formation. This was the moment Mila had been preparing for her entire life, though she had never expected it to arrive under such circumstances. Sir, I'm qualified to fly F-35 operations. The statement hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Several officers looked at each other with expressions of confusion, as if they had misheard or misunderstood her words. Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had shown Mila occasional kindness during their maintenance interactions, looked genuinely concerned that she might be experiencing some kind of stress-related breakdown. Kuznetsova, Peterson said carefully, his voice carrying the patient tone of an adult addressing a confused child. You're ground crew. You're not pilot trained, and you don't have the certifications necessary for combat operations. Sir, I have extensive flight training on F-35 systems, Mila replied, knowing that her words sounded impossible to people who saw her only as a maintenance worker. I've accumulated over 300 hours of simulator time. I understand all emergency procedures, and I'm current on tactical protocols for intercept operations. Brooks's voice crackled through the radio with obvious disbelief. Sir, there's no way a ground crew airman has 300 hours of F-35 simulator time. That's more training than some of our certified pilots receive in a full year. Lieutenant Davidson, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement, shook his head slowly. Even if that were true, simulator time isn't the same as actual flight experience. Flying an F-35 in combat conditions requires years of specialized training. Mila felt the familiar frustration of being dismissed based on assumptions rather than actual capabilities. Sir, I understand the skepticism, but my training background includes enough. Peterson interrupted, his patience clearly exhausted. Kuznetsova, I appreciate your dedication, but this is not a video game or a training exercise. We're dealing with potential enemy aircraft that could threaten civilian populations. F-35 operations require certified pilots with proven combat readiness, not ground crew personnel with simulator experience. Major Harrison nodded in agreement. Your job is to keep our aircraft mechanically sound, not to fly them. Focus on getting that hydraulic system repaired through proper procedures and leave the flying to qualified personnel. The dismissal was complete and absolute. In the span of minutes, Mila had gone from offering potentially crucial assistance to being relegated back to her assigned role as a maintenance worker who had overstepped appropriate boundaries. The senior officers returned to their urgent discussions about pilot availability and aircraft readiness, effectively erasing her from the conversation. But as she listened to their increasingly desperate attempts to solve problems that her training could address, Mila realized that the institutional blindness that frustrated her professionally was about to create a genuine national security crisis. The unknown aircraft were approaching critical airspace. NATO allies were requesting immediate assistance, and the Air Force was paralyzed by its own rigid assumptions about who possessed the capabilities necessary to respond effectively. Staff Sergeant Martinez approached her as the briefing began to disperse. Mela, I know you're trying to help, but claiming you can fly F-35s, that's not going to help your career. People are going to think you're either delusional or trying to get attention. Martinez meant well, but her concern only highlighted how completely the system had categorized Mila's abilities. In the minds of her colleagues, the idea that a Ukrainian ground crew member might possess advanced aviation skills was literally unthinkable. Their inability to conceive of such possibilities was about to become everyone's problem. As she walked back toward the maintenance hangars, Mila could hear the continuing discussions about mechanical workarounds and pilot availability. The crisis was deepening. The unknown aircraft were approaching critical decision points, and the Air Force's most advanced fighter squadron was being neutralized by problems that she knew how to solve. She had offered to help and been dismissed. She had demonstrated knowledge and been ignored. She had suggested solutions and been told to stay in her lane. Now she faced a choice that would define not only her own future, but potentially the safety of thousands of civilians who had no idea that their protection depended on someone being willing to challenge every assumption about what was possible. Mila completed her pre-flight mental checklist as she approached aircraft 075267, her modified flight gear secured and her resolve hardened into determination. The base continued its frantic activity around her, but she had entered the focused mental state that her father had taught her to cultivate during high-stress situations, a combination of hyper-awareness and calm calculation that allowed complex decisions to be made rapidly and executed flawlessly. The cockpit access ladder is already in position from her maintenance work, and she climbed with practiced efficiency, her movements reflecting years of preparation for this exact moment. As she settled into the ejection seat and began the startup sequence, muscle memory took over from conscious thought. Her hands moved across the control panels with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed these procedures countless times. Even though this was her first time in an actual F-35 cockpit, the aircraft systems came online in the prescribed sequence, each activation confirming that her repairs had been successful and the aircraft was fully mission capable. The heads-up display illuminated, the navigation systems initialized, and the communication equipment synchronized with base frequencies. Aircraft 075267, this is ground control, came the surprise voice over her headset. We show you powering up without clearance. State your intentions. Mila keyed her microphone, knowing that her next words would trigger alarms throughout the command structure and set events in motion that couldn't be reversed. Ground control, this is Senior Airman Kuznetsova in aircraft 075267. I am mission ready for immediate intercept operations. The radio silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds, an eternity in military aviation communications. When the response came, it carried the shock and disbelief of an air traffic controller trying to process information that seemed impossible. Say again, 075267. Did you identify yourself as Senior Airman Kuznetsova? Affirmative, ground control. I am requesting immediate clearance for intercept mission against unknown aircraft approaching German airspace. Aircraft 075267 is fully mission capable and ready for departure. The base communication system exploded with the activity as her transmission was relayed to squadron operations, base command, and undoubtedly to senior officers who were already dealing with the crisis of insufficient intercept capability. Mila listened to the overlapping conversations, hearing her name repeated with tones of disbelief, anger, and growing concern. Kuznetsova, this is Major Harrison, came the sharp voice of the operations officer. You are ordered to shut down that aircraft immediately and report to security personnel. You are not authorized for flight operations. Mila had anticipated this response and prepared her reply during the long hours of mental rehearsal that had preceded this moment. Sir, I understand your concerns, but I am the only immediately available pilot who can provide the fourth aircraft for proper intercept formation. Unknown hostile aircraft are approaching civilian targets, and NATO allies are requesting immediate assistance. You are not a pilot, airman. Harrison's voice carried the authority of command and the frustration of an officer whose carefully organized world was being challenged by circumstances he couldn't control. You are ground crew, and you are currently committing multiple violations of federal law and military regulations. Sir, I am a qualified F-35 pilot with over 300 hours of advanced simulator training and comprehensive knowledge of intercept procedures, Mila replied, her voice remaining steady despite the enormous pressure of the moment. My qualifications may not be officially recognized, but they are genuine and immediately relevant to this emergency. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson's voice cut through the radio chatter with the cold authority of senior command. Kuznetsova, you have 10 seconds to shut down that aircraft and exit the cockpit, or you will face immediate arrest and court-martial for theft of military property, unauthorized operation of a weapon system, and multiple other charges that will result in decades of imprisonment. Mila closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of this final decision point. Everything that had led to this moment, her childhood dreams, her father's training, her years of preparation, her frustration with institutional barriers, crystallized into a single choice between personal safety and moral obligation. She opened her eyes and keyed her microphone. Sir, I understand the consequences of my actions, but I cannot stand by while insufficient intercept capability potentially allows hostile aircraft to threaten civilian populations. I am requesting permission to join the intercept formation and demonstrate my qualifications through successful mission completion. Permission denied. Peterson's voice carried the finality of absolute command authority. You will comply with orders immediately or face the full consequences of military justice. But as Mila prepared to respond, a new voice entered the communication frequency, calm and measured, carrying the weight of someone who understood tactical aviation at the highest levels. Base operations, this is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, NATO Tactical Aviation Command, came the transmission. I've been monitoring this situation, and I need to understand our current intercept capability against the approaching unknown aircraft. Major Harrison responded immediately. Colonel Mitchell, we have 2 certified pilots ready for immediate departure, but doctrine requires a 4-ship formation for this threat level. The airman currently in aircraft 075267 claims F-35 qualifications. Yes, ma'am, but she's ground crew with no official pilot training or certification. Her claims are not credible. There was a pause before Mitchell responded, and when she did, her words carried implications that changed everything about the tactical situation. Major Harrison, those unknown aircraft have been positively identified as advanced reconnaissance platforms, conducting detailed intelligence gathering on our defensive capabilities. Their mission success will compromise NATO operational security for years to come. What are your immediate options for effective intercept? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the base command had assumed about available resources and acceptable solutions. Mila listened to the silence that followed, knowing that senior officers were being forced to confront the gap between their organizational preferences and tactical reality. Colonel, we can launch 2 aircraft immediately, but without full formation support, that's insufficient for this threat level, Harrison replied. I need 4 aircraft in intercept formation soon, or I'll be forced to request German air defense to handle the situation, with potentially significant diplomatic implications, Mitchell interrupted. Mila keyed her microphone knowing that this was her final opportunity to prove that capability mattered more than credentials. Colonel Mitchell, aircraft 075267 is mission ready with a qualified pilot. I can provide the 4th aircraft for proper intercept formation. Senior Airman Kaznitsova, Mitchell replied. You understand that if you're not qualified for this mission, you could cause a catastrophic failure that results in loss of life in an international incident. Yes, ma'am. I also understand that if we don't launch adequate intercept capability immediately, we guarantee mission failure through inaction. The radio fell silent as the weight of the tactical situation forced senior command to confront an impossible choice. Trust an untested airman with claims they couldn't verify or accept mission failure with consequences they couldn't accept. Aircraft 075267, Mitchell said finally, you are cleared for immediate departure. Prove your qualifications through mission success or face consequences that will destroy your life and possibly compromise NATO security. The choice is yours. Mila advanced the throttles and felt 43,000 pounds of thrust push her back into the ejection seat as the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world responded to her commands. Roger Control, aircraft 0757 departing for intercept mission. See you when I get back. Mila walked slowly across the tarmac toward aircraft 075267, her maintenance toolkit feeling heavier than usual as she struggled with the weight of knowledge that no one wanted to hear. Around her, the base continued its frantic preparations for a mission that everyone knew was inadequately resourced. Ground crews worked desperately to expedite repairs on the disabled aircraft, while pilots and operations officers tried to develop tactical solutions for an intercept mission with insufficient assets. The unknown aircraft had continued their approach toward German airspace, their intentions still unclear but their trajectory increasingly ominous. Intelligence updates suggested they would reach critical decision points soon, after which interception would become significantly more difficult or potentially impossible. As she began her inspection of the hydraulic systems on 075267, Mila's mind raced through the tactical situation that was developing beyond the base perimeter. Her father had trained her to think strategically about aviation scenarios, to consider not just immediate technical problems, but their broader implications for mission success and national security. The approaching aircraft represented more than just an identification challenge. If they were reconnaissance platforms, their success would provide potential adversaries with detailed intelligence about NATO response capabilities and defensive weaknesses. If they carried more sinister payloads, the consequences of failed interception could be catastrophic for civilian populations across Central Europe. But even as she understood the strategic implications, Mila wrestled with the personal implications of what she was considering. Everything in her military training emphasized the importance of following orders, respecting the chain of command, and staying within assigned roles. Challenging authority wasn't just discouraged, it was a fundamental violation of military discipline that could result in court-martial, imprisonment, and the destruction of her career. Yet her father had also taught her that true military service sometimes required difficult choices between competing obligations. A soldier's highest duty is to protect innocent people, he had told her during one of their conversations about military ethics. Sometimes that duty conflicts with other obligations, and when it does, you must choose what serves the greater good. As she worked on the hydraulic system, following the manual override procedures she had memorized months ago, Mila found herself thinking about the families in Frankfurt and other German cities who had no idea that their safety might depend on decisions being made at Ramstein Air Base. Children going to school, parents commuting to work, elderly people enjoying retirement, all of them trusting that military professionals would protect them from threats they couldn't even imagine. The hydraulic repair was proceeding exactly as she had predicted. The secondary system failure was indeed isolated and easily bypassed, leaving the aircraft fully mission-capable with only minor operational limitations. But aircraft readiness was only half the problem. Even with three mission-capable F-35s, the squadron still lacked sufficient pilots for an effective intercept formation. Lieutenant Martinez and Chen could handle two aircraft, but proper tactical doctrine required four-ship formations for missions of this complexity and potential danger. Mila stepped back from her completed repairs and looked up at the cockpit of the F-35. The advanced glass displays were dark, the ejection seat empty, the sophisticated control systems waiting for someone qualified to bring them to life. She knew every switch, every display, every emergency procedure. She understood the tactical requirements for intercept operations, the communication protocols for international airspace, and the weapon systems necessary for various threat scenarios. But she also knew that climbing into that cockpit would represent a complete break with everything that had shaped her military career. She would be abandoning her assigned duties, ignoring direct orders from superior officers, and claiming capabilities that she couldn't prove without actually demonstrating them in the most high-stakes environment imaginable. The radio in her maintenance kit crackled with urgent communications between the control tower and squadron operations. The unknown aircraft had been positively identified as military reconnaissance platforms from a nation that had been increasingly aggressive in testing NATO responses. While not immediately hostile, their mission represented a serious provocation that required a firm but measured response. All available pilots to Operations Center immediately, came the announcement. We need to discuss modified intercept procedures with reduced aircraft availability. Mila listened to the growing desperation in the voices around her. Highly trained, experienced military professionals were being forced to compromise mission effectiveness because their rigid organizational structure couldn't adapt to unexpected circumstances. They had the aircraft, they had the weapons, they had the tactical knowledge, but they lacked the flexibility to utilize resources that didn't fit standard categories. As she stood beside the F-35, Mila thought about her sister back in Ukraine, about the cities that had fallen to enemy aircraft because defensive responses had been inadequate or too slow. She thought about her father's stories of pilots who had made difficult choices in impossible situations, who had risked everything to protect people who would never know their names. The choice crystallized with sudden clarity. She could follow orders, stay in her assigned role, and watch as an inadequate response potentially failed to protect innocent civilians, or she could use the capabilities she had spent years developing, risk everything she had worked for, and possibly prevent a tragedy that no one else was positioned to address. Mila looked around the maintenance area, confirming that she was momentarily alone and unobserved. The other ground crew members were focused on their own urgent repairs, while supervisors coordinated with operations personnel in other areas of the base. The F-35 sat ready for flight operations, its systems functional and its fuel tanks full. She thought one more time about the consequences of what she was considering: court-martial, imprisonment, deportation, the end of her military career, and possibly her entire future in the United States. Her family back in Ukraine would be devastated, and she would become an international incident that could affect diplomatic relations between multiple nations. But she also thought about the alternative: unknown aircraft approaching civilian targets, while NATO forces sat paralyzed by their own bureaucratic limitations, a crisis that would be resolved through compromise and half measures instead of decisive action. The possibility that her unique combination of knowledge and capability would remain unused while people who trusted military protection suffered the consequences. Mila walked to her maintenance vehicle and retrieved her personal flight gear, equipment she had quietly acquired over the months but never expected to use. As she began putting on the survival vest and helmet that she had modified to interface with F-35 systems, she made her final decision. She would climb into that cockpit. She would demonstrate that capability mattered more than credentials, that protecting innocent people was more important than following organizational charts, and that sometimes the most unlikely person was exactly the right person for an impossible job. The unknown aircraft were still approaching, time was running out, and Senior Airman Mila Kuznetsova was about to prove that being underestimated was the most powerful advantage of all. The intercept developed with the precise choreography of military aviation at its most professional level. Commander Petrov's formation maintained their course toward German airspace, while the NATO F-35s took positions that demonstrated both capability and restraint, close enough to ensure positive identification and immediate response to any hostile actions, but far enough away to avoid creating unnecessary provocation. Mila found herself flying wing position to Lieutenant Martinez, her aircraft maintaining perfect formation spacing despite the complex maneuvering required to match the speed and altitude of the reconnaissance aircraft. The F-35's fly-by-wire flight control systems made precise formation flying easier than older aircraft, but the mental discipline required to maintain position while monitoring multiple communication frequencies and weapon systems demanded the kind of multitasking ability that came only from extensive training. Falcon 4, your formation flying is exceptional, Martinez transmitted on their internal frequency. Where did you learn to maintain position like that? The question carried implications beyond simple curiosity. Formation flying was one of the most demanding skills in military aviation, requiring split-second reactions and absolute trust between pilots. The fact that Mila was demonstrating professional-level capability was forcing her squadron mates to reconsider their assumptions about her background and qualifications. "Thank you, Flight Lead," Mila replied, not wanting to elaborate on her training history while managing the tactical situation. "I've had extensive practice in challenging conditions." As they closed to visual range of the reconnaissance aircraft, Mila could see that Commander Petrov was flying a modified Su-35 equipped with advanced sensor packages and electronic warfare systems. The aircraft's configuration confirmed that this was indeed a sophisticated intelligence-gathering mission, not a routine border probe or navigation error. "Flight Lead, unknown aircraft are equipped with advanced reconnaissance systems," she reported. "Configurations suggest they're capable of detailed intelligence gathering on NATO defensive procedures and aircraft capabilities." Chen's voice carried growing concern as he analyzed the same intelligence. "If they complete their mission profile, they'll have comprehensive data on our intercept procedures, aircraft performance, and operational capabilities." This was exactly the kind of scenario that Mila had studied during her analysis of modern reconnaissance operations. The unknown aircraft weren't just testing NATO responses. They were conducting a comprehensive intelligence operation that would provide valuable data for future military planning. Every minute they remained in proximity to NATO forces, they were gathering information that could compromise Allied security for years to come. "Commander Petrov, this is NATO Flight Lead," Martinez transmitted on the emergency frequency. "Your current operations are gathering intelligence on NATO defensive procedures. This constitutes hostile reconnaissance activity that requires immediate cessation." Petrov's response carried the calm professionalism of an experienced aviator who understood the tactical and legal complexities of the situation. "NATO Flight Lead, we are conducting lawful reconnaissance operations in international airspace. Our activities do not violate any international agreements or aviation protocols." Technically, Petrov was correct. His aircraft were operating in international airspace, and reconnaissance activities were explicitly prohibited under international aviation law. But the strategic implications of allowing such operations to continue were serious enough to justify stronger responses under NATO defensive protocols. Mila keyed her microphone, knowing that her next communication would either demonstrate her understanding of international aviation law or reveal gaps in her knowledge that could compromise the entire mission. "Commander Petrov, this is Falcon 4. Under Article 3 of the Chicago Convention and NATO treaty provisions, your reconnaissance activities within 50 nautical miles of critical infrastructure constitute a potential threat to civilian aviation safety and national security. We are authorized to escort your aircraft away from sensitive areas." The radio silence that followed her transmission lasted nearly 15 seconds. When Petrov responded, his tone carried a note of professional respect that hadn't been present in his earlier communications. "Falcon 4, your knowledge of international aviation law is impressive. Very well, we will accept escort to the edge of your claimed security zone, but we reserve the right to continue reconnaissance operations in truly international airspace." Martinez's voice crackled through the internal communication frequency with obvious amazement. "Falcon 4, how do you know international aviation law well enough to cite specific treaty provisions?" "Sir, I've studied the legal frameworks that govern international intercept operations," Mila replied. not wanting to explain that her father had insisted she understand the political and legal dimensions of military aviation, not just the technical aspects. As the formation began the delicate process of escorting the reconnaissance aircraft away from sensitive areas, Mila noticed something troubling on her electronic warfare displays. The Su-35s were continuing to operate their reconnaissance systems, gathering detailed intelligence on F-35 capabilities even as they complied with the escort requirements. "Flight lead, they're still conducting active reconnaissance on our aircraft," she reported. "Their electronic warfare systems are analyzing our radar signatures, communication protocols, and flight characteristics." This presented a tactical dilemma that required immediate decision-making. The reconnaissance aircraft were technically complying with the escort requirements, but they were continuing intelligence-gathering activities that could compromise F-35 operational security. Standard intercept procedures didn't provide clear guidance for this scenario. Davidson's voice carried the uncertainty of a young pilot facing a situation that exceeded his training and experience. "Flight lead, what's our response protocol for continued reconnaissance during escort operations?" Martinez consulted his tactical displays and communication equipment, but Mila could tell he was struggling with the same procedural ambiguity that was affecting the entire formation. The standard playbook didn't cover reconnaissance aircraft that complied with escort requirements while continuing intelligence operations. "Flight lead, recommend we demonstrate F-35 capabilities that will compromise the value of their intelligence gathering," Mila transmitted, her tactical analysis suggesting a solution that would address the reconnaissance problem without escalating the confrontation. "Explain your reasoning, Falcon 4. Mila had studied electronic warfare scenarios extensively, understanding how reconnaissance aircraft gathered intelligence and how that intelligence could be rendered less valuable through appropriate countermeasures. "Sir, their reconnaissance systems are optimized for gathering data on normal flight operations. If we demonstrate advanced maneuvering capabilities and electronic warfare countermeasures, we can show them that their intelligence is based on limited operational profiles, not full F-35 capabilities." Chen's voice carried growing excitement as he understood the implications of Mila's suggestion. "That's brilliant. We give them data that shows them how much they don't know, which reduces the strategic value of the intelligence they've gathered." Martinez paused before responding, weighing the tactical sophistication of Mila's recommendation against the unconventional nature of receiving strategic advice from someone whose qualifications he still couldn't verify. "Falcon 4, you continue to demonstrate tactical thinking that exceeds anything I would expect from your background. But your recommendations are sound. Formation, prepare for advanced maneuvering demonstration." As the F-35s began executing complex flight patterns that showcased capabilities far beyond normal intercept operations, Mila felt the satisfaction of tactical problems being solved through knowledge and creativity rather than force or confrontation. She also knew that the most challenging part of the mission was still ahead. Escorting the reconnaissance aircraft out of sensitive airspace would require precise flying, perfect communication discipline, and the ability to project strength while maintaining professional restraint. The real test of her qualifications was just beginning. Everything changed in the space of seconds. Commander Petrov's formation was maintaining course toward international airspace when Mila's radar warning receiver exploded with alarms, indicating multiple surface-to-air missile launches from an unexpected location. The electronic warfare display showed at least 6 missiles inbound from what appeared to be a mobile launcher hidden in the mountainous terrain below. "Missiles inbound," Mila transmitted immediately, her training taking over as she began executing defensive maneuvers. Multiple SAM launches from bearing 180 degrees, estimated time to impact 90 seconds. The tactical situation had instantly transformed from a routine escort mission to a life-or-death combat scenario. The missiles were advanced systems with sophisticated guidance capabilities, and their launch timing suggested this had been a carefully planned ambush, designed to target both the NATO intercept formation and the reconnaissance aircraft simultaneously. Martinez's voice carried the controlled urgency of a pilot managing multiple life-threatening crises. "All aircraft, execute evasive maneuvers. Falcon 3 and 4, deploy countermeasures and maintain formation integrity." But as Mila analyzed the missile trajectories on her tactical display, she realized that standard evasive procedures wouldn't be sufficient. The missiles had been launched from positions that created overlapping engagement zones, making traditional escape maneuvers ineffective. Worse, the mountainous terrain limited maneuvering room and created radar shadows that the missile guidance systems were designed to exploit. Flight lead, standard evasive maneuvers won't work, she transmitted, while pulling her F-35 into a climbing turn that placed maximum stress on both aircraft and pilot. The launch positions create a tactical trap. We need coordinated defensive actions to defeat the missile engagement. Chen's voice crackled through the formation frequency with obvious strain as he fought against G-forces while trying to process the tactical situation. Falcon 4, what kind of coordinated actions? This was the moment that all of Mila's preparation had been building toward. A combat situation that required not just flying skills, but comprehensive understanding of air-to-air tactics, electronic warfare, and the specific capabilities of both F-35 systems and enemy missile technology. Her father had drilled her on exactly these scenarios, emphasizing that modern combat aviation required pilots who could think strategically under extreme pressure. Formation, execute Tactic 7, she transmitted, referencing a complex defensive maneuver that required precise timing and absolute trust between pilots. We used terrain masking and coordinated electronic warfare to break missile guidance locks. There was a pause before Martinez responded, and Mila could hear the stress in his voice as he processed her tactical recommendation while managing his own defensive maneuvering. Falcon 4, Tactic 7 requires perfect timing and coordination. If we get it wrong, sir, if we don't execute coordinated defenses, the missile engagement zones will prevent effective evasion for any of us. Mila interrupted, her tactical analysis showing that individual defensive actions would result in at least 2 aircraft losses. We need to trust each other and execute as a formation. Davidson's voice carried the fear of a young pilot facing his first combat situation. I've never executed Tactic 7 in actual combat conditions. None of us have, Martinez replied. But Falcon 4 is right about the tactical situation. Formation, execute Tactic 7 on my mark. What happened next required the kind of precision flying and tactical coordination that represented military aviation at its absolute peak. The 4 F-35s began a complex series of maneuvers that used terrain features and electronic warfare systems to create overlapping defensive zones while maintaining formation integrity under extreme stress. Mila found herself flying inverted at 500 feet above mountainous terrain. Her aircraft's electronic warfare systems synchronized with the other F-35s to create coordinated jamming that confused the incoming missiles' guidance systems. The physical stress was enormous. G-forces that pushed the limits of human endurance combined with the mental demands of precise formation, flying in life-threatening conditions. Missiles at 30 seconds, Chen reported, his voice strained by the physical demands of high-G maneuvering. Maintain formation discipline, Martinez commanded. Electronic warfare system showing good coordination. Falcon 4, your timing is perfect. But as they executed the final phase of Tactic 7, Mila's radar warning receiver indicated that one missile had maintained guidance lock and was continuing to track her aircraft. The coordinated defenses had successfully defeated 5 of the 6 missiles, but the remaining threat was sophisticated enough to adapt to their countermeasures. Falcon 4 has 1 missile still tracking, she reported, her voice calm despite the fact that she had perhaps 15 seconds before impact. Continuing evasive maneuvers. This was the moment that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. The ability to execute complex emergency procedures under ultimate pressure while maintaining situational awareness and tactical effectiveness. Mila's years of preparation had included extensive study of individual defensive tactics for situations exactly like this. She rolled her F-35 into a knife-edge turn that brought her dangerously close to the mountainous terrain, using the radar shadow of a rocky ridge to break the missile's guidance lock, while positioning herself for a high-G climb that would take her out of the engagement zone. The maneuver required split-second timing and precise control inputs that had to be executed perfectly on the first attempt. Missile guidance broken, she reported as her aircraft cleared the ridge line and climbed towards safer altitude. Threat neutralized. The formation regrouped at 25,000 feet, all four aircraft intact and mission-capable, despite having survived the most sophisticated surface-to-air missile engagement any of them had ever experienced. But as they conducted damage assessments and confirmed their tactical situation, the implications of what had just occurred became clear. Flight lead, this was a planned ambush, Mila transmitted, her tactical analysis of the missile launches revealing coordination that indicated extensive intelligence gathering and careful preparation. Someone knew our intercept procedures well enough to position mobile launchers for maximum effectiveness. Martinez's response carried the grim realization that they had been targeted by adversaries who understood NATO tactics in disturbing detail. Agreed, Falcon 4. The question is whether this was designed to target us specifically or the reconnaissance aircraft we were escorting. Commander Petrov's voice cut through their discussion with information that changed everything about the tactical situation. NATO formation, this is Petrov. We have intelligence that additional missile batteries are positioned along your return route to Ramstein. The ambush we just survived was the first phase of a larger operation designed to gather intelligence on NATO defensive capabilities. The mission had evolved from a routine intercept to active combat, and the return flight would require tactical flying skills and strategic thinking that would test everyone's capabilities to their absolute limits. Mila checked her fuel status, weapon systems, and aircraft condition as she prepared for the most challenging flight of her life. Her months of preparation had brought her to this moment, but the real test was still ahead. The debriefing room at Ramstein Air Base had been hastily converted into what resembled an international tribunal. Mila sat at a small table facing a panel that included Colonel Sarah Mitchell from NATO Command, Lieutenant Colonel Peterson from Base Operations, Major Harrison from Squadron Leadership, and two civilian officials whose titles she didn't recognize but whose authority was unmistakable. The contrast between her tactical success and her procedural violations created a tension that filled the room like an electrical charge waiting to discharge. Everyone present understood that her unauthorized flight had simultaneously solved a critical operational problem and created unprecedented legal and diplomatic complications. Senior Airman Kuznetsova, Colonel Mitchell began, consulting a tablet that contained what appeared to be extensive documentation. Your flight today violated numerous military regulations, federal laws, and international agreements. However, it also prevented what intelligence analysis now indicates would have been a catastrophic failure of NATO defensive capabilities. Peterson leaned forward with obvious skepticism. Colonel, regardless of the tactical outcomes, we cannot ignore the fundamental breach of military discipline that occurred here. If we allow subordinates to decide which orders to follow, we undermine the entire structure of military command. I agree completely, Mitchell replied. But we also cannot ignore the fact that Kuznetsova's tactical knowledge, flying skills, and strategic analysis exceeded that of certified pilots with official qualifications and extensive experience. The civilian officials exchanged glances before one of them spoke. Colonel Mitchell, our preliminary assessment indicates that Kuznetsova's tactical recommendations during the intercept mission were more sophisticated than anything we've seen from pilots with advanced training and combat experience. Her understanding of international aviation law, electronic warfare procedures, and multi-aircraft tactical coordination suggests preparation that goes far beyond anything available through official channels. Mila remained silent, knowing that her fate was being decided by people who had to balance operational effectiveness against institutional stability. Her success had proven that the military systems for identifying and developing talent were flawed, but it had also demonstrated the risks of individuals taking action outside established procedures. Major Harrison consulted his own documentation before addressing the panel. Sir, our investigation into Kuznetsova's background reveals that she has indeed accumulated extensive flight training and tactical knowledge through unofficial sources. Her father is a retired Ukrainian Air Force colonel who provided comprehensive aviation education that rivals formal military pilot training. How comprehensive? Mitchell asked. Ma'am, over 300 hours of advanced simulator time, detailed study of F-35 systems and procedures, and tactical training that included scenarios identical to what she encountered today. Her preparation was more thorough than many certified pilots receive. The revelation hung in the air, like a challenge to everything the panel understood about how military qualifications were supposed to work. Mila's capabilities weren't the result of natural talent or lucky improvisation. They were the product of systematic preparation that had simply occurred outside official recognition. One of the civilian officials leaned back in his chair with obvious amazement. "You're telling us that a ground crew airman has better tactical training than pilots who went through years of official certification programs in some areas?" "Yes, sir," Harrison admitted reluctantly. Her knowledge of international aviation law, electronic warfare procedures, and multi-threat engagements exceeded what we would expect from someone with her official qualifications. Peterson's frustration was evident as he struggled with the implications of Mila's success. Even if that's true, it doesn't justify ignoring direct orders and stealing military property. We have procedures and regulations for reasons that go beyond individual missions. "I understand that, sir," Mila said quietly, speaking for the first time since the debriefing began. "But I also understood that innocent people might die if I followed procedures that prevented effective action. Sometimes protecting people requires accepting personal consequences." Colonel Mitchell studied Mila with the expression of someone trying to reconcile contradictory evidence. "Kuznetsova, you realize that your actions today could result in court-martial, imprisonment, and deportation." "Yes, ma'am. I also realized that not acting could result in mission failure with consequences I couldn't accept." The panel members consulted among themselves in whispered conversations that Mila couldn't hear but could interpret from their body language and expressions. She was witnessing institutional decision-making at its most complex level, the attempt to balance competing priorities that didn't have obvious solutions. After several minutes of discussion, Colonel Mitchell addressed her directly. "Kuznetsova, your tactical success today prevented what could have been a major intelligence coup for hostile forces. Your flying skills, tactical knowledge, and strategic analysis proved exceptional under the most demanding conditions possible." Mila felt a flutter of hope, though she knew that tactical success didn't automatically translate into forgiveness for procedural violations. "However," Mitchell continued, "your violations of military discipline and federal law cannot be ignored or minimized. The precedent set by allowing subordinates to ignore orders, regardless of their capabilities or motivations, would be dangerous for military effectiveness and institutional stability." The hope faded as quickly as it had appeared. Mila had known from the moment she climbed into the F-35 that success wouldn't guarantee forgiveness, but she had hoped that exceptional performance might create possibilities that didn't previously exist. One of the civilian officials consulted his tablet before making an announcement that surprised everyone in the room, including Mila. "After consultation with NATO command, German government officials, and senior Pentagon leadership, we have reached a decision regarding Senior Airman Kuznetsova's actions and future military status." The room fell silent as everyone waited for words that would determine not just Mila's fate, but the military's response to a situation that challenged fundamental assumptions about talent identification, institutional flexibility, and the relationship between individual capability and organizational authority. "Senior Airman Kuznetsova, you are hereby relieved of your current duties and assigned to immediate specialized training that will provide official certification for capabilities you have already demonstrated." The words hit Mila like a physical shock. Not punishment, but opportunity. Not court-martial, but recognition. "You will report to the Air Force Test Pilot School for accelerated F-35 certification, followed by assignment to tactical aviation duties appropriate to your demonstrated capabilities. Your unauthorized flight will be officially classified as an emergency response to tactical conditions that required immediate action." Mila stared at the panel in amazement, hardly able to process that her career-ending violation was being transformed into a career-defining opportunity. Colonel Mitchell smiled for the first time during the debriefing. "Sometimes, Kuznetsova, proving you belong somewhere requires taking actions that officially you're not supposed to be capable of taking. Today, you proved you belong in an F-35 cockpit. Now, we're going to make it official." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any uploads from us.